I love to sew a festive dress every year around Christmas. And I happen to have a super vibrant vintage poinsettia print fabric and plenty enough to make a dress. I actually kept meaning to sew up this particular fabric for the last couple of Christmas seasons, but it finally made it to the top of the list, and this is the year for it. Time to turn you into a dress. So here is what I think my plan is. I have this absolutely gorgeous vintage yardage of this poinsettia Christmas print, and I conveniently have a little note telling me that my past self has already washed this. Thank you, past Tasha. And I have 3 yards and it is 60 inches wide, so I have plenty to work with here. And what I intend to do is make another modified Butterick B5748 and do a jumper dress. Now, I made one of these earlier in the year with a plaid flannel, and you can watch that video. So I already have my pattern pieces here. In a previous iteration, I actually had modified the back piece to be higher up for a corduroy sheath dress jumper that I made several years ago. And then most recently for my plaid one, I made this modified front piece. So I will use those. So I am good to go there. And I think I probably have enough fabric for a 3/4 circle skirt, and I have pattern pieces for that. If it turns out that I can't fit that, I can always do a half circle skirt or maybe a pleated kind of modified flared skirt. We'll see when I get to that point. And I will wear this with this snuggly wool blend turtleneck that I sewed earlier this year, and you can actually watch the video for that as well. I will also link that in the description. And then I am thinking I may use this belt with this instead of making a matching belt. This is from my rope belt tutorial. I will likewise link to that in the description. And, you know, it is possible that this belt and this fabric will look a little bit kind of like Christmas curtains and Christmas curtain tiebacks. A little bit kind of Sound of Music there, but hey, I love Julie Andrews, love Sound of Music. I don't necessarily hate it, so we'll see what I think when I get to the end and try it all on. So let's cut out. This was a pretty wide fabric, which maybe means it was a decorator fabric. Not sure, since the weight was pretty lightweight, though it has a bit of a stiff hand for our cotton, particularly a vintage cotton. But extra width is always nice when cutting out, since it gives me more width to work with if I'm doing a print, which, you know, it being me, it usually is. Now, this is a really busy print with so many poinsettias on it, so it's kind of hard to work around them and try to avoid a poinsettia in a weird position on the bodice. I tried my best to work around that, but please don't feel the need to point this out to me if it works out in the end that I have a flower boob. Just saying. And I did end up deciding to go with a pleated skirt, not because I didn't have enough fabric for a 3/4 circle skirt. I probably had plenty, but the day before I was cutting out the fabric, I'd worn a different Christmas dress that I sewed in the past, where I'd used a skirt from one of my 1950s patterns and forgot how much I love that skirt, so I went with that for this dress. One of my least favorite parts of prepping is cutting out the fusible interfacing, and I honestly sat on this project for about 3 days before doing it. I don't know why. It doesn't take very long, but I just find it so annoying. And I'm definitely under a time crunch with this dress, so I'm going to be batching even more than I normally try to do. I even chain pieced on my serger when I finished the lower edge of all my facing pieces, just so I could just cut out between them. So what are all the things that I could prep next? Well, that was pinning the darts on the bodice front and back, and pinning the shoulders on the facings. Technically, I could have pinned the shoulders on the bodice too if I didn't think I'd stab myself with that many pins, but I definitely would have because I know myself. And I pinned the pleats on the front of the skirt in order to baste them on the machine. The skirt on this 50s pattern is really cool. The front is pleated and the back is just 2 flared gores, probably about equivalent to a half circle skirt in the back, and it just makes a lovely skirt. I've used this for several different dresses. I just kind of tack it on to whatever bodice I want, and I think it's going to be really nice for this Christmas dress. No matter how many markings I have on a pattern piece to mark pleats, when I'm looking at the actual fabric, it's hard for me to make sense of the markings that I've transferred to the fabric. So I usually do it like this, where I've transferred my markings to the fabric pieces, as well as notching at each pleat line, and then I just refer to my paper pattern piece and the notches and basically completely ignore the other markings. There's just 3 pleats on either side of the center front, and they face towards the center front. And I can already tell this is going to be such a pretty skirt. And then it's like, okay, how much can I get done at the sewing machine at the same time now? I sewed the shoulder seams on the facings and all the darts, and also stay-stitched the neckline and armholes since I forgot to do that earlier. And then I basted the pleats on the front skirt pieces. I tend to use more of a normal stitch length rather than a long basting stitch here. Otherwise, if I go too long, the pleats can still kind of wiggle around more when I'm handling the fabric. And then I just have to press everything before figuring out what I can match up next. So earlier on, I hadn't decided if I wanted to add side seam pockets, but I did decide to ultimately. So I cut those out next and pinned them to the skirt pieces, and then pinned the center front seam on the skirt and then the shoulders on the bodice too. And then I sewed up all those seams. About halfway through, once I was about to get started on the longer skirt seam, I switched over to a walking foot so I don't stretch the skirt seams out. You can watch my walking foot tips video if you want to know more about that. I'll link it in the description. And I finished the seams on my serger and pressed everything from that batch. Now here's a quick look at the bodice. I couldn't completely avoid a poinsettia boob, but it ended up looking like a nice spray of flowers on the bodice, so I'm happy with that. Then I can move on to pinning the skirt side seams now that I have the pocket pieces on, and then getting the bodice assembled, starting with pinning the neckline of the facing to the neckline of the bodice. This is now, I think, the 3rd time I've used this bodice this year for my plaid jumper dress last spring and my Halloween flannel jumpsuit, and each time I keep thinking I might like to widen the shoulders a tad towards the neckline, and then I don't do anything about it, and guess what? I'm not doing anything about it this time either, so I'll probably be having this conversation with myself again next time. So I got the neckline sewed up and the side seams pressed, and then trimmed, graded, and clipped the neckline seam allowances before understitching so it'll all lay nice and flat. And then it's just kind of like lather, rinse, and repeat, doing the same process basically for the sleeveless armholes as I did for the neckline. And you can watch my all-in-one facing tutorial video if you'd like. I'll link that in the description. And then the fun part of pulling the bodice backs through to the front of the bodice, and I have myself an almost finished bodice now. Okay, so I have to admit here, some life stuff got in the way of me filming sewing the rest of this dress, but I did manage to still finish sewing it just by the skin of my teeth before we set off to visit my family. And it's too good not to share, so here we are. So along with everything you saw me sew so far, that means I polished off assembling the skirt and the bodice together, inserted my zipper, and then I did a little narrow hem on the sewing machine to finish it all up. I definitely wasn't up for sewing a belt, so Christmas Fraulein Maria vibes it is with my rope belt. I can imagine this fabric as a tablecloth backdrop for a decked out, kitschy, mid-century holiday meal, complete with colored aspic jello molds, so now I get to be that tablecloth and deck myself out for the holidays. Happy holidays to you, my friends, and happy sewing. So we're making it a dress. That's not what the hell am I trying to say?